Hello and welcome to the Justice Factor. Today, the new South Africa is 20 years and 1 day old. How far have we come? How far do we still have to go? After a discussion last week with Professor Jonathan Jansen, we decided to go back to some of the architects of this new South Africa and ask them whether we have a good story to tell. We have two guests today. My first guest is a man who was the National Party government's main negotiator in the democracy talks that led to the 1994 election. Roelf Meyer was Minister of Constitutional Affairs at the time and held a position under President Nelson Mandela's 1994 post-apartheid coalition cabinet as well. Our second guest is Dr. Freni Ginwala, an activist all her life and the first Speaker of the National Assembly of South Africa from 1994 to 2004. I began by asking Roelf Meyer how far South Africa has come since 1994.
I think we have. Let me put two factors in context. The one was the political transition that happened on the 27th of April 1994. That was when the interim constitution was introduced, when it became law, in fact. And that was a moment of immediate transition, politically and constitutionally. What had to happen thereafter is an ongoing process, and we haven't completed that. One can call it transformation in the socio-economic space, whatever. The point is, we still have a lot of challenges. And I think in certain areas we have failed ourselves. We haven't done enough. We haven't completed the transformation yet, particularly when you look at education, when you look at job opportunities, when you look at poverty, when you look at health conditions, when you look at services in certain areas. So there are huge numbers of South Africans who are still suffering. And that is, to my mind, primarily because the transformation has not been completed.
Do you think we've really gone far enough on race reconciliation? Did the TRC work?
I think we've moved a lot. We mustn't underestimate the fact that we never had, after the change of government, after the change of the constitution, we never had any aggression against, for instance, the former oppressors. I've never experienced any aggression. I think most white people have never experienced pure aggression on the basis of what happened in the past. And I think that's a positive factor. If you compare it with others in other conflicts around the world, and I've been involved in many, then we haven't seen the same kind of thing that's happening there. Even now, today, as we speak, the question is, what is happening in Eastern Europe, what is happening with regard to the Ukraine, is this not part of the feeling by the Russians that they have lost too much at the end of the Cold War? And that type of thing is not relevant in South Africa.
And do you think that's sustainable, that we're on the road to making that better rather than beginning to fissure, as you say, along the lines of what's happening in those states, in the Ukraine and so forth?
If I go around in the metropolitan areas where many of us live, I think I'm seeing what already the new South Africa looks like, or the future South Africa looks like in terms of that integration. Maybe in the rural areas it's different because people are less exposed to each other there, communities are more separate and apart. But I think, as the process moves on, maybe give us another generation or two, and we will be a normal, stable society.
If we've made so much progress, we're seeing, particularly now in the run-up to the elections, a lot of service delivery protests, people up, communities up in arms. What are they saying about this new South Africa?
I think what we're seeing being expressed in the protests is exactly what I was referring to in the beginning, and that is the point that we haven't seen sufficient progress with regard to the transformation. Sometimes the expectations might be unreal. I mean, there's been a lot of new houses built, there's been a lot of water supply, electricity supply, etc. since 1994. But in other areas, people feel themselves failed. And quite frankly, in certain areas, the local government structures are not operating as they should. And I think it's in this way that we really have to get more direction, also at the leadership level, be it at local level or at the provincial level, but also at national level.
How do we get that transformation going?
Everyone has his own answer.
Writing another PhD.
Everyone has his own ideas about this. I personally think if if we try to summarize and focus on the things that need to be done immediately, then it would be, in the first instance, in my mind, be about strong and innovative and visionary leadership at all levels, but also from all sectors of society, not only the politicians. We can blame a lot on the politicians, but the question remains, what do we do as ordinary citizens ourselves? What do we do as leaders within civil society? What do the business leaders do about this? All of us have a collective responsibility. The second one is that I think we must direct more attention to what the problems are with regard to education. We haven't made sufficient progress since 1994 in regard to education, both management as well as policy. The third one, I think we need to spend more time on what we can do with regard to entrepreneurship and development of small businesses.
Does it have anything to do with our education system?
It is very directly related to that. I'm sorry to say, I think that's the problem. One of the biggest damages of apartheid was probably education. But the question is, have we done enough since 1994 to correct those mistakes of the past? I don't think so.
Having worked on the negotiations, having worked on the new constitution, are you negative? Are you feeling positive about South Africa today?
I feel very positive about South Africa, but I think we can do better. You know, I keep on saying, we are, like in business terms, an underperforming going concern, which means we're making profits, but we can do much better. But you know, I have the opportunity to travel a lot because I'm visiting countries where there's still a lot of conflict going. And that means that I'm in exchange with other ideas and with other challenges that people come across. And I think if we look seriously, honestly at our own situation, we can be very thankful for where we find ourselves. I'm not negative at all, but at the same time I would like to say I think we can do better, we can do more. And it primarily lies in those areas that I've mentioned.
You've spoken about South Africa being an underperformer in business terms. Where do you see us being in 15 years, in 20 years from now? What are the things that we need to get right to be a better performer? Do you think we can be a better performer, or are we just a perpetual underperformer, so people who will never become greater than what they are now?
I think we're going to perform better. And the main reason I'm saying that is that I think there's a new generation coming through of South Africans across the spectrum that really can perform according to the expectations that we have of the future. I had the opportunity recently to visit some campuses, university campuses, where I was asked to speak about the question of the same that you're asking. In other words, our 20-year celebration. And if I look at not only the comments that have been made, but also the type of questions that were coming from the students from across the spectrum, I'm very encouraged. This is what is giving me hope, thinking about it, that in 20 years or less from now, those students are going to be in leadership positions all around the country.
On a personal level, what was it like for you in the early 1990s, late 80s, when people basically said, you're a traitor, you're selling South Africa down the line? How did that make you feel, and do you feel vindicated now?
I not only feel vindicated now, I felt vindicated at the time that we were busy with it, because in my own mind, what we were doing then, I was totally committed to. For me, it was important that we created a new constitution for South Africa that gives equal rights to all South Africans. And that was not only the aspiration of myself, of course, but of the majority of the people of the country. And once we succeeded in making that settlement, when we signed the interim constitution into law by the end of 1993, I jubilated about it. And when people asked me, how can you? You've given away your rights. I said, no, I've liberated myself. And that's exactly the same feeling I have today, 20 years later.
After the break, we asked Dr. Freni Jinwala if we have a good story to tell.
News that moves. ENCA.com.